Imagine standing outside a remote mission station on the coast of Papua New Guinea. It is just after sunset. There are no city lights washing out the sky. Beyond you is the darkening sea. Behind you, mountains rise into the tropical night. Then a brilliant object appears in the sky. It is not simply a point of light. According to the people watching, it has a shape. It seems to have levels, illuminated openings, and what look like supports underneath it. Even more astonishing, several figures appear to be standing on top. You lift your arm and wave, and one of those figures appears to wave back. This is not a scene from a science fiction movie. It is what Anglican missionary William Booth Gill and a group of local witnesses said happened over 2 nights in June of 1959. The story became known as the Boianai sighting, or the Father Gill encounter. It contains almost everything investigators hope to find in a UFO case: multiple witnesses, notes written during the event, drawings, signed names, repeated sightings, and what appeared to be an attempt at communication. Yet today, outside serious UFO circles, this extraordinary story is nearly forgotten. I'm Tony Sweet, and this is Truth Be Told. Today, we travel to the coast of Papua New Guinea to investigate the night when the people on the ground looked up at unknown figures in the sky and believed those figures acknowledged them. Before we begin, an important reminder: the term UFO means an unidentified flying object. Today, many people prefer UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Neither term automatically means alien spacecraft. This story rests mainly on eyewitness testimony and documents produced after the sightings. We do not have a clear photograph, a piece of recovered material, or modern radar data that independently proves what the witnesses saw. Some details also vary in later retellings, including the total number of people present at different moments. What we do have is the account of Reverend William Booth Gill, the names or signatures of numerous witnesses, correspondence surrounding the event, and a later investigation by Australian authorities. Our goal is not to turn uncertainty into certainty. It is to reconstruct what was reported, test the possible explanations, and ask why this case has endured. In 1959, Papua New Guinea was not yet the independent country it is today. The southeastern portion of New Guinea and surrounding islands were administered by Australia as the territory of Papua and New Guinea. Independence would not come until 1975. The Anglican mission at Boianai stood near the coast in what is now Milne Bay Province. This was a remote environment, far removed from the technological centers of the Cold War. Airplanes were known in the region, but the night sky was not crowded with commercial traffic, satellites, and drones as it is today. William Booth Gill was an Australian-born Anglican priest and missionary. The word father in the case name refers to his role in the Anglican Church. By the available accounts, Gill was educated, accustomed to recording information, and not eager to present himself as a prophet receiving a supernatural revelation. That point matters because advocates often describe Gill as a reluctant or cautious witness. But caution does not make anyone infallible. Educated observers can still misjudge distance, scale, and movement in the sky, especially at night. The real question is whether ordinary perceptual mistakes can account for the entire sequence reported at Boianai. The June incident did not appear completely out of nowhere. Reports of unusual aerial lights had circulated in the region, and Gill had previously seen a stationary white light during April of 1959. In correspondence written before the famous encounter was fully publicized, he discussed recurring reports and the possibility that something unusual was operating near Boianai and Mount Pudi. This earlier interest cuts in 2 directions. For supporters, it suggests a continuing pattern witnessed by reliable people, not a single isolated moment of confusion. For skeptics, it means Gill was already thinking about flying saucers. Expectations can shape perception. When an observer sees an ambiguous light, the mind naturally tries to fit it into an existing story. That tension follows us through the entire case. We should also remember the year 1959. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik less than 2 years earlier. The space age had begun. Rockets, satellites, and unidentified objects in the sky were part of global conversation. Science fiction was becoming mass culture. At the same time, people did not have smartphones, instant satellite tracking applications, or consumer video cameras. When something strange appeared, witnesses had only their eyes, memories, handwritten notes, and perhaps a basic camera, if one was nearby and ready. On Friday, June 26, 1959, those limitations would become crucial. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, Gill noticed a bright white light in the northwestern sky. The sun had gone down, but the sky was not necessarily completely black. He initially wondered whether he was looking at Venus. That ordinary first reaction deserves attention. He did not immediately announce an alien ship. He attempted to identify the light as a familiar astronomical object. But as he watched, the appearance seemed to change. Gill described the light as approaching, or becoming clearer, until he believed he could see a solid circular form. His drawing showed a broad lower body with a narrower upper section. Underneath were 4 leg-like or support-like projections. Along one portion of the object were bright areas sometimes described as panels or portholes. The whole object produced a brilliant glow, while parts of it appeared brighter than others. Gill called others to look. Among the people associated with the observation were mission teachers, workers, students, and medical personnel. The group was not necessarily assembled all at once. Individuals came and went as the sighting continued, which helps explain why published totals range from about 25 witnesses to more than 30 across the 2 nights. The witnesses reportedly saw the primary object hovering in the direction of the sea. Smaller lights appeared nearby. At different points, the objects were said to move through or become obscured by cloud. Then the case became far stranger. At roughly 7:00 p.m., Gill wrote that a figure appeared on top of the object. The figure seemed human in general outline, not a tiny gray alien with enormous black eyes, not a monster, but a person-like silhouette. A second figure appeared. Later, the witnesses believed they could see additional figures, sometimes described as 4 in total. They appeared to move about on an upper deck or platform. Gill thought they were doing something, perhaps working on the object. At one point, a thin blue light seemed to project upward into the sky. Try to picture the scene without adding anything that the record does not give us. There are no dramatic laser beams striking the ground. No creature walks into the mission. No one is abducted. Instead, a group of people stands outside in the humid evening, staring toward a luminous object while small, human-like forms seem to move across its top. That restraint is one reason the account feels unusual. It is spectacular, but it does not follow the familiar alien encounter script that later became common in popular culture. Gill continued making notes and recording times. The observation was not a single flash lasting 2 or 3 seconds. According to his record, the activity continued for hours, though clouds sometimes interfered with visibility and the exact appearance changed. And then something almost comically ordinary happened. Gill went inside for dinner. To a modern listener, that can sound impossible. If you believed an unknown craft carrying occupants was hovering nearby, why would you leave to eat? Gill later explained his behavior in practical terms. The object showed no immediate sign of landing. The event had continued, and he had obligations at the mission. An evening church service also went forward. Believers sometimes interpret this as evidence that Gill was calm and truthful. Skeptics see it differently. Perhaps the phenomenon looked much less dramatic in person than it became in later descriptions. If Gill truly believed a massive spacecraft was hovering just offshore, dinner and routine worship seem like strange priorities. Both readings are possible. After the service, Clouds increasingly covered the sky. At approximately 10:40 p.m., witnesses heard a loud explosive sound. Gill did not believe it was thunder, but he could not establish its cause. The first night ended without a landing, physical trace, or closer contact. Even so, Gill understood that he had recorded something extraordinary. He prepared a report and had witnesses confirm that they had seen the event. But the most famous part of the Boianai story had not happened yet. On Saturday, June 27, the objects returned, or at least the witnesses believed the same phenomenon had returned. The second evening's activity began earlier, while there was still enough light for the witnesses to see the landscape. Reports describe several objects, including a large one with figure-like shapes, again visible on top. This time, the people at the mission did not merely observe. Gill decided to signal. He stretched out his arm and waved toward the figures. According to his notes, a figure appeared to respond by raising both arms. Gill repeated the gesture, and the figure seemed to repeat it as well. Others in the group began waving. More figures appeared to acknowledge them. Gill then used a flashlight. He directed a series of flashes toward the object. The craft did not blink back in a simple code, but it appeared to move in an oscillating or pendulum-like fashion, as though responding. One person suggested that they bring the object down. Gill made additional gestures toward the ground. There was no landing. This is the center of the mystery. Lights can be misidentified, stars can shimmer, planets can appear to move when clouds drift past them. But can those effects convincingly produce the impression of figures that respond to deliberate gestures? There are at least three possibilities. First, the interaction occurred essentially as reported. Intelligent occupants aboard an unknown aerial object noticed the group and responded. Second, the witnesses watched an ambiguous, natural, or distant human-made phenomenon and interpreted random changes as replies. Humans are exceptionally good at finding agency and meaning. When we wave at a distant shape and it moves, we connect the two events, even when no connection exists. Third, the story grew in the recording or retelling. This does not require a deliberate hoax. Memory is reconstructive. People observing together can influence one another. One person says, "It waved," and an uncertain movement becomes a shared conclusion. Yet the near-contemporaneous notes make the third explanation more difficult than it would be in a case documented years later. The claimed exchange was not added only after decades of storytelling. It appears near the beginning of the case history. Gill's own emotional reaction is also revealing. He reportedly considered the situation extraordinary, but he did not claim that the figures spoke to him telepathically or delivered a religious message. He seems to have believed the occupants were human-like and possibly engaged in a technological operation. The objects eventually moved away or disappeared from view. A further observation was reported on June 28. But the 2 evenings of June 26 and 27 became the foundation of the famous case. No visitors came down, no artifact remained on the shore, only the witnesses, the written record, and one unforgettable idea remained. They waved back. Why has this case survived for more than 6 decades? The first reason is the number of witnesses. Depending on how researchers count the people present at various stages, accounts mention approximately 25 observers, 37 people, or 38, including Gill. It would be misleading to imagine every witness stood in one fixed group for the entire event and independently produced an identical description. They did not, but this was also not a solitary sighting reported by one person with no corroboration. Gill listed witnesses and obtained signatures. Some had roles in education or health work at the mission. Later, researchers said surviving witnesses continued to support the basic account. The second reason is timing. Gill made notes during or very close to the events. He recorded approximate times, changes in the objects, the appearance of figures, and interruptions caused by dinner, worship, and weather. Contemporaneous notes do not guarantee accuracy. A witness can write down a sincere misperception immediately, but early documentation reduces the chance that the entire account was invented gradually over many years. The third reason is Gill himself. Investigators who met him often described him as calm, sincere, and unimpressed by fame. That is character evidence, not physical evidence. Honest people can be mistaken. Still, the case contains no obvious financial motive that explains why a missionary and a large group of residents would construct such a story. We must also address a historical problem in how the case has been told. Many older reports reduce the local Papuan observers to an anonymous group, sometimes using language that would be unacceptable today. That framing places Gill at the center and treats everyone else as supporting scenery. But the people of Boianai were not props in a European missionary's adventure. They were witnesses in their own right. Unfortunately, much of the widely circulated literature preserves far more information about Gill than about their individual lives, interpretations, and later experiences. That imbalance matters. When we say this was a multiple witness case, we should also ask whose testimony was recorded in detail, whose voice was filtered through outsiders, and whose perspective was lost. At the time, Australian authorities had responsibility for the territory. The Royal Australian Air Force examined the report months later. An investigating officer interviewed Gill and considered astronomical and psychological explanations. The smaller lights could potentially be associated with bright planets. The primary object was more difficult, but the official assessment leaned toward a natural phenomenon shaped by expectation, prior UFO discussion, and subconscious influence. In plain language, the investigator did not conclude that Gill had met extraterrestrials. The idea was that real lights or celestial objects may have been transformed by interpretation into a structured vehicle with occupants. Supporters strongly object to that conclusion. They point out that Gill himself considered Venus and rejected it. They note the reported apparent structure, the figures, the duration, and the responsive gestures. A planet cannot wave. It cannot develop a deck, supports, and moving occupants. But skeptics answer that the planet does not have to perform those actions. The human visual system supplies the structure. Atmospheric distortion, moving cloud layers, and the autokinetic effect, the illusion that a stationary point of light moves against a dark background, can create a dynamic experience. Once several observers share an interpretation, each person's expectations may reinforce the others. There is also the problem of distance. Gill estimated that the object was relatively close and low over the sea, but without a known size, reliable triangulation, or a physical reference at the same distance, witnesses cannot easily determine the range of a light in the sky. A small nearby object and a large distant object can occupy the same apparent size. Altitude and distance estimates in UFO reports are often impressions, not measurements. Weather offers another possible clue. Clouds repeatedly obscured the objects. That could mean the lights were behind or within cloud cover. It could also mean the apparent forms were created or altered by light passing through clouds. None of those proposals fully settles the matter. They describe mechanisms that might explain parts of the report, but they do not reproduce the entire two-night experience under controlled conditions. The official investigation therefore gives us an interpretation, not a laboratory demonstration, and not proof of a spacecraft. What about deliberate deception? A hoax must always be considered when a case becomes this dramatic. Someone might have used a lantern, a balloon, a distant boat, a projection, or another device. Gill could have exaggerated the story, or participants could have coordinated their claims. The problem is evidence. No convincing mechanism for such a hoax was discovered. There was no exposed conspirator, recovered device, or clear confession. Creating a bright object with visible moving figures, apparently suspended over the sea for long periods, would have been challenging in that location in 1959. Gill's decision to record names and circulate the report also exposed him to scrutiny. A deliberate fabrication could have damaged his standing with church authorities. That does not make a hoax impossible. It simply means that hoax is a label without a demonstrated method unless new evidence appears. A more complex interpretation asks whether the event was psychologically real without being a literal spacecraft encounter. In a modern scholarly analysis, historian of religions David Halperin treated the sighting as a visionary experience shaped by culture, expectation, and the relationship between Gill and the Papuan community. This approach does not necessarily accuse anyone of lying. It asks how groups turn ambiguous sensory information into a meaningful shared event. That can feel dismissive if psychological is used to mean imaginary or irrational, but perception is always psychological. Every sighting of an airplane, a planet, or an unknown object is processed through the brain. The difficult question is whether collective expectation can account for the specificity of the Boianai descriptions. We should also avoid forcing the case into only a Western argument between alien spacecraft and misidentified planet. The people of Papua New Guinea had their own cultures, spiritual traditions, and understandings of the sky. Gill occupied the complicated role of an Australian missionary in a colonial territory. Different witnesses may not have interpreted the experience in exactly the same way, even if they agreed that they saw an unusual light or object. Unfortunately, the surviving popular narrative rarely gives us enough first-person testimony from the local witnesses to reconstruct those differences. That missing dimension may be one of the case's greatest losses. More than 60 years later, the Father Gill encounter remains unresolved in the most honest meaning of that word. Unresolved does not mean extraterrestrial. It means the surviving evidence does not allow us to establish a single explanation with confidence. If Gill and the witnesses saw a conventional astronomical or atmospheric phenomenon, the case is still valuable. It shows how dramatically perception can transform uncertain lights, especially in a group setting. If they saw a rare human-made device, then the identity of that technology and its operators remains unknown. And if their central description was accurate, if a structured craft hovered near Boianai with figures on top that intentionally responded, then this is one of the most extraordinary close encounters ever recorded. The case also challenges the modern belief that good UFO evidence must come from a military jet, a sophisticated radar system, or a classified sensor. Here, the evidence is human. A priest with a notebook and a community of observers standing beneath a tropical sky. That makes the story both powerful and fragile. Human testimony can preserve an event when no machine is present. Human testimony can also distort an event in ways no witness recognizes. The Boianai sighting lives precisely inside that tension. On the evening of June 27, 1959, William Gill raised his arm toward something luminous in the sky. He believed a figure raised its arms in return. Maybe it was contact, a brief, almost peaceful acknowledgement between human beings and visitors whose origin remains unknown. Maybe it was an extraordinary chain of perception, expectation, and coincidence. Or maybe the truth lies somewhere outside the choices we keep trying to impose on the story. We may never know. But I keep returning to the simplest image. People gathered on a remote coastline, looking upward, not running, not fighting, not hiding, but waving. And whatever they saw appeared to wave back. What do you think happened at Boianai? Was this a genuine encounter with intelligent occupants, a natural phenomenon transformed by human perception, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to Truth Be Told, share this episode with someone who questions everything, and follow us for more stories exploring UFOs, ancient mysteries, spirituality, and the unexplained. I'm Tony Sweet. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and remember that sometimes the most important mysteries are the ones history nearly forgets.